I heard so many stories when somebody was, "Oh, I'm really unhappy with how this person is doing." And do they actually know what you expect from them? What do you mean? Isn't it obvious? No, it isn't unless you are very, very clear about it. People get hired for a job, not understanding what the expectations are and then be surprised of that, right? And then it hurts both parties. I've seen it in business between companies, like when consultants come to solve a problem and the problem is not very well defined, and the consultant doesn't have the maturity to say, "Hey, I don't know what you're actually asking here. Let's be clear about it first." It happens very, very often. So I think that this was one of the cards that was more talking about a principle or a trend rather than a particular trigger or particular situation that would inspire it.
As coaches, we see this all the time where there is a mismatch in expectations, where clarity of expectations hasn't been made to the point where both sides understand exactly what is expected. And until you get to that point, you can't expect to get the outcomes that you're looking for because people don't know what you're looking for. And this also comes back to trust, doesn't it? When someone says to you, well, and I don't think they're performing particularly well, or I don't think that they're doing this particularly well. The first thing I say to that person is, well, what do they think? And you know what's going to happen. The expression on the person's face is going to be, oh, I haven't spoken to him about it.
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
and that's because they either don't want to have a difficult conversation, or they haven't got the level of trust that they need to be able to have that conversation. Welcome to CardCast, the podcast where Milan and I chat about the cards that we draw at random from a deck of cards Milan has created. Now, we don't choose these cards in advance, we pick them at random, so let's shuffle the deck and see what pops out. Setting expectations.
Yeah, it's a hard card. Yeah, we haven't had a hard
It
card
is.
for a moment. Yeah, that's great.
It's a heart card, but it's a hard card as well, because this is a very difficult thing to do well. And most people underestimate how critical this is.
Yeah.
And I have this term that I use called, leadership by osmosis. The assumption that people just get what's in your head at any point in time. And as we know, leadership by osmosis is really, really, really effective. So it's worth spending a time on this card and just talking through why this is so important. So Milan, why did you come up with this card as a concept?
So it's about people, it's about culture, right? It's about the human system. And we see this so often, and I don't remember what was the actual trigger for this one. However, uh, I heard so many stories when somebody was, "Oh, I'm really unhappy with how this person is doing." And do they actually know what you expect from them? What do you mean? Isn't it obvious? No, it isn't. Right? No, it isn't unless you are very, very clear about it. People get hired for a job, not understanding what the expectations are and then be surprised of that, right? And then it hurts both parties. You can jump into a project, and if you don't know exactly how good looks like, when it gets at the end, like what are your chances of actually, satisfying the requirements if they are not clear? I've seen it in business between companies, like when consultants come to solve a problem and the problem is not very well defined, and the consultant doesn't have the maturity to say, "Hey, I don't know what you're actually asking here. Let's be clear about it first." It happens very, very often. So I think that this was one of the cards that was more talking about a principle or a trend rather than a particular trigger or particular situation that would inspire it.
As coaches, we see this all the time where there is a mismatch in expectations, where clarity of expectations hasn't been made to the point where both sides understand exactly what is expected. And until you get to that point, you can't expect to get the outcomes that you're looking for because people don't know what you're looking for. and this also comes back to trust, doesn't it? When you say, when someone says to you, well, and I don't think they're performing particularly well, or I don't think that they're doing this particularly well. The first thing I say to that person is, well, what do they think? And you know what's going to happen. The expression on the person's face is going to be, "Oh, I haven't spoken to him about it."
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
and then that's because they either don't want to have a difficult conversation, or they haven't got the level of trust that they need to be able to have that conversation. And both of those situations are not good. And you've got to get beyond that. You've got to get to the point where it is possible to have that conversation, which isn't always easy. But unless you get that clarity of expectations, and I think it's when I my first thought was going to my book, and chapter 2 in my book is called "Most People in Business Don't Know What's Expected of Them." Now that's a long chapter title, but that's intentional because I want to make people think about what's actually in there. And the whole chapter is all about clarity of expectations and the fact that most people don't have clarity of expectations. So you've really got to work at this. You've really got to work at this so that people know what the outcome is and what people are looking for. And that really takes us to scorecards, because scorecards is a really good way of getting clarity of expectations in a role.
Before we get there, before we
Mhm.
get there, I think that there is one more dimension to it, right? The scorecard and impact filter, we'll talk about it. That's the how, right? What we do need to mention is that, yeah, you have situations when the expectations are not clear, but you have even more dangerous situations where the expectations seem to be clear, they just don't match between the two parties, right?
Yep,
So,
yep.
the power of assumption, right, to mess up our lives is pretty much unlimited. And this is a great example of it, where the communication about it is poor. There are no checks and balances to make sure that, hey, are we actually talking about the same thing? Is it actually clear? Right? Because there might be impression of clarity without an actual agreement or without an actual alignment. And we saw it very often where, for example, a new hire could be afraid to admit that they don't understand the instruction or they don't understand the expectation because they feel like it would be, it would look bad on them, right? So they will not, thinking that they'll figure it out later, but they never do. And then they will just work hard to try to do whatever. And off it goes, right? So again, slowing down, we've talked about it a couple of times now, that slow down in the beginning a little bit, be very clear about the expectations, and even more importantly is be clear about the other party's clarity about understanding of those expectations, because just because they say they get it doesn't mean that they get it the same way as you do, and vice versa.
So how do we get that clarity of expectations between two parties? How do we get that in practice?
Well, the card is talking about two tools. One is the scorecard that we use in metronomics, which is inspired by top grading scorecard, but really
Yep.
looking at, hey, these are the accountabilities, these are the competencies you'd have. This is how good looks like. This is how we measure success. This is the mission. By just writing it down and saying, hey, this is what it is, it's a really, really good step. That's for a position. That's for a function in the organization,
Mhm.
right? Uh,
Not the individual. Just want to stress that
yeah,
it's not for the person, it's for the function.
it's for the function that they're fulfilling, right?
Yeah.
Then, if we are looking about a project, about something that needs to get done, then Sullivan's impact filter that he's talking about with Dr. Benjamin Hardy in Who Not How is a really, really good tool, right? Which is, again, this is how good looks like. This is what happens if we win. This is what happens if we don't win, right? Again, spelling it out very, very, very clearly. Lately I was thinking that it's like AI prompting. You get what you prompt. Like, if you're not clear about that, you will get crap back. You will get slop. You will get bad stuff. You have to learn. It's a skill to set up your expectations well. Again, the AI analogy works really well here because it's a skill to work with AI effectively, and it's all about being clear about the expectations and definition of how good looks like, so you get outcomes back. The actually. Now thinking about it, the whole framework, like whether you script or whether any of those, they're all the same, right? Like, who are you? A competency, right? What is the task, right? A mission, right? How does good look like? Like, what does it actually mean? AKA, metric, measurement, good outcome, all of those things. Impact, like it's all the same components. We just need to make sure that they are spelled out correctly, whether we're talking to a human or a machine, and we need to have a feedback loop to make sure that they were understood correctly. Similar thing.
It's not just about getting it down in writing, it's also making sure that both sides, both parties, have the same understanding of what's expressed in words
Yeah.
and
And
numbers.
yeah,
And
and,
numbers.
and I'm sorry, this just it just keeps coming because again, with AI, you use the same principle. If it's not clear, ask me. Right? That's what you do. It's one of the main principles. So I think that creating that feedback loop uh, to make sure that those expectations as set are also received is absolutely critical. And that could
Yeah.
take a whole bunch of forms, right? It's like, hey, this, in new function, we would set up an onboarding plan and we would look at, okay, we'll be looking at every week and how those things are progressing, right? So we have the checking points. We deliberately set a framework for ensuring that the expectations are understood and put in place uh, tripwires that when a correction is needed, we don't sleep through that moment, right? We'll catch it right there and then to minimize any damage and maximize the chance of success.
So, getting clarity of expectations, you need to have a conversation. The conversation can be hard sometimes. So, you've got to build that trust to be able to have that conversations. And it's also not just about putting it down in words and numbers. You need to make sure that you've both got the same understanding about those words and numbers. So, whether it's expressed in a scorecard or some other way, you still got to get to that point where you have clarity of understanding and clarity of expectations on both sides.
And we're talking in the business setting, but this is the same in any relationship and in life. And a lot of especially the hard cards are you can look at it and say, oh, this is kind of obvious, but just because it's obvious doesn't mean it's common. And in any relationship, in any interaction, be very clear about what your expectations are, give you a much higher chance of actually getting it.
Yeah. Because communication by osmosis doesn't work.